Hello, everyone. My name is Monica Lewis. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the engagement manager at SMU DataArts. I'm going to take a pause to provide my physical description. I'm a cisgendered African American woman in my mid 30s. I'm wearing a black blouse and a wine colored sweater. My hair is twisted and I'm wearing a headset. And behind me, you can see my home office. On behalf of our team at SMU Data Arts, we would like to extend our sincere thanks and appreciation to each of you for joining us today to learn more about the Arts Vibrancy Index report and to hear from our amazing guest panelists as they share more about their amazing, vibrant art communities. Before I start with introducing our amazing panelists and speakers, I do want to take a moment to pause to acknowledge the lands that we all call home. While we come today on a virtual platform, we take this moment to acknowledge the significance of the lands from coast to coast, and we specifically acknowledge all First Nations peoples who steward that land. At SMU Data Arts, we honor the Apache, Caddo, Comanche, Cushata, Tonkawa, Wichita, and the affiliated Kichi, Waco, Taiwaikoni, and Lenni Lenape peoples, upon whose traditional territories SMU Data Arts now exist. I invite each of you to utilize our chat feature to share your own local and personal land acknowledgements if you would like to. For a bit of housekeeping, we will ask that you remain on mute during our time together. That's going to ensure the best sound quality as we are recording today's presentation. We do ask that you find some helpful features located within Zoom. And the first you'll find is that Q&A feature. Feel free to share any questions that you have about today's content at any point during our time together. And I've already encouraged you to use that chat feature, and that'll be a wonderful way for you to get connected to our amazing team in the background, who will also use the chat feature to share some helpful links over the topics that we'll discuss today. And finally, closed captioning is available if you choose to use so. You will be prompted, if you find the CC icon located on your Zoom dashboard, you'll then be prompted to view closed captioning by live transcripts or by subtitles. If you need any assistance with any of the features that I've just mentioned, feel free to send us a chat and our team in the background will be more than happy to assist you. And again, just for a final reminder, we are recording today's presentation and we'll be sure to share a link of that so that you'll have that to maybe share with a colleague who was unable to join us today. Now, I want to start with our agenda for today's presentation. We'll start our time with an overview of the Arts Vibrancy Report and some helpful takeaways that'll help you kind of understand that report. We'll be sure to share some additional ways that you can be connected with that report throughout of the year. And the majority of our time will be with our amazing panelists as they share how their work has sustained their vibrant art communities within each size category across the nation. With that, I don't want to waste any more time. I want to go ahead and jump into the report itself. So if you could allow me to introduce Daniel Fauner, who is our Assistant Director of Research at SMU Data Arts, where he manages the organization's applied research agenda for projects ranging from program evaluation, workforce demographics, and using artificial intelligence to better understand the art and cultural spaces. Daniel, welcome.
Thanks, Monica. Hi, everyone. I'm Daniel Fauner. I use he, him pronouns, and I am a white man wearing a gray collared shirt today. So we're going to start today with just an overall discussion of what arts vibrancy is and what the report and map are that we released recently provide to the field and the information you and any community across the country can glean hopefully helpful information from. Within our report, we attempt to think about the ideas of supply and demand in communities across the country using different metrics that I'll discuss in a minute. When we're doing our top communities that are in our report, we found 40 of the top communities, and those 40 come out of the total 947 areas that are called core-based statistical areas that are defined by the federal government that allow us to look at every country or every community across the United States. So these top 40 in the report reflect 40 out of about 950 communities in the country. So to create this type of information, we have to model what the U.S. arts and culture sector looks like. As I mentioned, we're looking across all of these communities in the United States. And so you'll notice when you're exploring our data that all of our metrics are available in every community across the country. We don't want to favor any one community over another based on the fact that they might collect more data on their communities. So a lot of our work will involve analyzing census data, data from the IRS, but also incorporating information from our own cultural data profile and other sources that enable us to look at various facets of the arts and culture sector throughout the United States. It's important to note that a lot of these sources that we utilize are not available essentially up to today. There's some slight delay in how some of these sources are provided to the public via these government entities, and that there has been some delay due to the COVID pandemic. Different data sources and agencies from the federal government have had some delays in putting data out, and as of right now, this is the most current data that we have. You will notice last year we did not put out a report on arts vibrancy for this very reason. As data sources were unavailable and extremely delayed, we didn't feel it was appropriate to put out a report as we were all trying to better understand the landscape that we're currently in since the beginning of the pandemic. So we attempt to look at government support, we look at the overall influence of different sectors related to arts and culture and communities, and even down to thinking about individual artists within communities. So within those data sources, we attempt to think about the ideas generally of supply and demand. And then helping with that idea is government support, because that is a major factor in terms of the the sector of arts and culture support from government agencies. I'll say first off that no single metric or single data source provides a perfect snapshot of any community. And we feel that this metric of arts vibrancy across the different metrics that you see on your screen is a good approximation of the sector to see what's going on. However, we do recognize that this is limited. For example, under government support, we look at state arts dollars and grants and federal arts dollars and grants. However, we don't include local arts and culture within this metric because there's no consistent data source across the entire United States that allows us to fairly or evenly assess levels of local government funding. However, when we're looking at contributed revenue within the arts dollar metric, that does include monies that organizations will have received from local government. So it's still incorporated, but not as its own breakout metric on its own. So this is a good metric that we use to assess arts and culture, but there are other things that are missing from this data. For example, we do recognize that Native American data sources might not be as accurate or as complete to show the arts and culture in their areas as we find with other communities. So we're always looking to improve these metrics. So to begin with, when we think about art supply, or supply of arts, we think about arts providers. How many artists are there? How many organizations? How many employees are providing arts and culture services to the communities across the country? We then think about demand, thinking about the money aspect. How much money are organizations bringing in from program revenue, earned revenue, contributed revenue? What are they spending on expenses and compensation to employees? And then lastly, we are looking at government support, where we're looking at state level data and federal level data, with the federal level data coming from National Endowment for the Arts, as well as IMLS, looking at libraries and museums. So we're always looking for new data sources that we can incorporate into this process that allow us to look as fairly as possible across the entire country. As new data sets become available, we will be sure to include them if they are good for this purpose. The other thing I'll mention that we get questions on sometimes is what we do with the data. As we bring these data sources in, we normalize the data and conduct some different statistical tests to allow us to, as fairly as possible, analyze this data. One part of this process involves looking at the data on a per capita basis, so that way, communities that have a lot of organizations and a lot of people, think New York City, for example, aren't benefited necessarily just by their sheer size compared to other communities. So by doing the financial items on a per capita basis and the number of artists and so forth on a per capita basis, it allows us to be more fair with that analysis. Additionally, we adjust all the financial measures by a cost of living index. So comparing a community in rural West Virginia to New York City, let's say, might be difficult just as the cost of living is so different in these different types of communities. So by using a cost of living index adjustment, we're able to, again, attempt to make these data points as fair as possible. And lastly, we adjust the data to model it based on the spatial characteristics of communities. Through our research at SMU DataArts, we found that the location of organizations is more than just the pinpoint on the map of their local address. We did some research, and on average, there's about a 30-mile radius of impact for many organizations in the U.S. That allow us to understand how far the impacts of some of these organizations are. So using this model that we've created, this spatial model, we're able to better understand the flows of people and flows of arts and culture that might go over traditional boundary lines. So for example, mentioning New York City again, there's a high concentration of arts and culture, and it's very close to northern New Jersey, just across the river. So northern New Jersey in many ways benefits, and people in northern New Jersey benefit with their close proximity to New York City, let's say. And the same can be said in the other direction, that arts activity in northern New Jersey benefits people in New York, that they can travel back and forth very easily on a short distance for the most part to utilize arts and culture in those locations. So using all of those methods to adjust our data on these metrics, we're able to analyze every community and then compare those communities to see who is scoring higher on these different metrics and as an overall approach. In this year's report, we found that after doing all this modeling and assessing all these communities, that there are programmatic shifts that have adjusted some of the funding that we found throughout the process. It's sort of adjusted on the list where different communities fell, especially with large communities. Some of the characteristics we noticed with their arts vibrancy scores is that there was either extreme high concentration of arts and culture, or there was an extensive dispersion of arts and culture throughout communities. For example, when we evaluate Dallas, which is where Southern Methodist University is, we find that there's a high concentration, but relative to the entire size of Dallas, Dallas scores a little bit lower on the list than, say, the other communities that are in the top 40 of our list. So those ideas of how are your communities being served relative to their size feeds into how we think about the spatial model and how arts and culture exist within our communities. So in our report, and you can see the top 40 communities across the various size categories that we look at to see which communities are in the top. There's usually very little shifting among the top communities year over year, but it's really exciting to see a couple new communities that made the list, including Brevard, North Carolina, Ann Arbor, Michigan, Kalamazoo and Portage, Michigan, and Salt Lake City. So it's really exciting to see some of these results and to be able to dig down within the report to see how these different communities ranked on the various metrics that we showed earlier: supply, demand, and government support. Lastly, I'll mention that the research that we've done for arts vibrancy isn't limited just to those top 40 communities, as I said, which are defined by core-based statistical areas from the federal government. We also do this at the level of analysis of counties in the United States. So every single county in the US is also analyzed on its own. And that's what you'll see on our map on our website. So if your community didn't make it into the top list, you can come to our map and look at these counties. You can see that the darker the color on the current map shows higher levels of arts vibrancy. So if you were to click on a county that perhaps you live in or serve, it will give you all the same metrics relative to arts dollars, arts providers, and government support. This can be very useful in comparison exercises. Maybe there's a community that your area likes to compare against to see how you're doing, and you can compare on these many different metrics to see how your community is doing relative to arts vibrancy. And it also has the information for the top 40 communities if you want to look and see how you might compare to those top communities, perhaps as a peer or an aspirational community might be of interest. The last thing I'll mention on the map is there are additional metrics that are not in the full report. We provide information about leisure activity within communities and socioeconomics within communities. So thinking about wealth, thinking about hotels, zoos, and so forth. While not part of our calculations of overall vibrancy, we have found that there is association between socioeconomics and other leisure relative to arts vibrancy. So it can be very helpful to understand communities on those characteristics to see what the living conditions are within a community just beyond what we do with arts and cultural analysis with our vibrancy metrics. So those are the main aspects that you'll see coming through from our report and from our map on our website. Within the report, there is a methodology section that explains in more detail some of the items I mentioned about how we calculate things, why we've chosen certain data sets, and limitations relative to this approach. So again, while I say no single metric or data set is a perfect encapsulation of any community, this is a potential metric that could be included in your efforts to better understand what's going on in your community on these particular data points. And with that, I will hand it back over to Monica. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Daniel. That was a really great walkthrough of this report. I also want to share before we go into our community conversation that we will be highlighting additional communities as they get to talk about their communities through a series of blogs throughout the year. So we do hope that you continue to stay engaged with us. As you learn today from our panelists, there'll be additional opportunities to hear how folks are maintaining vibrant communities in other parts of the nation. So with that, I want to go ahead and introduce our amazing panel. Uh, I will start with Megan Barber, who is an experienced nonprofit leader, musician, and community builder. Driven by her belief in the power of the arts to change the world, Megan takes pride in supporting artists and art groups to realize their visions. Megan is the executive director of the Community Arts Partnerships of Thompson County in Ithaca, New York. Her goals include cultivating a diverse and thriving local art scene and supporting equitable access to the arts. We also have Marty Camino, who is the current executive director for the Center of Arts in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, a post he assumed in 2020. Under his leadership, the organization has achieved increased fundraising success and greater financial stability despite the uncertainty of the pandemic. Camino's background is highlighted by a wealth of nonprofit operations and event production experience, including 5 years at the Grand Teton Music Festival, where he helped the organization streamline artist operations and bolster outreach activities. And finally, we have Alicia Kittner. Since 2024, Alicia Kittner has been the Chief Executive Officer of Cincinnati's Engine for the Arts, ArtsWave. Under her direction, ArtsWaves created a multifaceted diverse equity and inclusion and access plan, developed a 10-year community impact strategy for over 100 art organizations, and piloted the first ever cultural tourism marketing campaigns. She's raised and invested over more than $100 million in art activities that build a more vibrant and connected Cincinnati. Megan, Marty, Alicia, we're so happy to have you and welcome. I'm going to go ahead and stop my screen so we can be able to enjoy this conversation in its fullness. And I'm going to go ahead and kick us off with an interesting question that is posed to each of you. And I'll start with Megan. Could you tell us a little bit about your vibrant community? Share a little bit about the landscape of your art and cultural community and how your organization fits into that world.
Sure. Thanks, Monica. And it's great to be here with all of you. I am based in Ithaca, New York. We are a small city in upstate New York in the Finger Lakes region. A small city, but surrounded by a larger county of rural communities. We are in the land of the Goyenkono people, who are part of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. And if you've ever been here, we have beautiful waterfalls and a beautiful lake. We're home to Cornell University and Ithaca College, which bring in a lot of arts related performances and museum exhibits. We're somewhat geographically isolated, but we're connected to the world through the flow of people through the universities and colleges, and also through the tourism that comes to our area, especially in the summertime when it's beautiful. We are home to hundreds of artists from all modalities, visual artists, performing artists, writers, and many arts groups, theater companies, performing arts venues, a circus, and lots of arts festivals, including the Ithaca Festival, the Grassroots Festival of Music and Dance, and lots of opportunities for amateurs to be involved in the arts. I just joined the Ithaca Community Orchestra, and I'm having a lot of fun with that. The Community Arts Partnership serves sort of as the Arts Council for the county. We do a lot of grant making and funding for artists and arts groups, and then we have our own programs and events that are all about connecting artists with audiences.
Thank you, Megan. Marty, would you like to go ahead?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Hi, and thank you. So I am in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, relatively rural area. The town of Jackson itself has approximately 10,000 people and spread out throughout the county about 20,000. And, I was thinking about some of the points Daniel was making just related to how our environment, particularly being in a mountain town next to two national parks, Yellowstone being the most famous of the two, is influential on our arts community. So our organization, Center for the Arts, is a 80,000 square foot arts campus right in the heart of downtown Jackson. We have 20 resident organizations under our roof, and many of which were in existence before the Center for the Arts was built. So we opened our doors in 2007, really to serve as a home for arts and cultural activity in the community. So we have a 500 seat performing arts theater, and do all sorts of programming in there, as well as dance studios, music studios, and spaces like that. And then in addition to that, our community, there's some of the sort of Western heritage, whether that's music or Western influenced art. In town here, we have the National Museum of Wildlife Art. So wildlife art being something that sort of connects with our location. And then a really nice, rich network of independent artists as well. And so we sit in a place where, we are fortunate to connect with and serve all those different organizations and individuals.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Alicia, would you end us off on this question?
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. ArtsWave is the local arts agency for the Cincinnati region, which encompasses 15 counties in 3 states. So not only Cincinnati, Ohio, but also Northern Kentucky and Southeastern Indiana. There's really no local government funding for the arts in our region. But instead, for nearly 100 years, ArtsWave has been the primary way that the arts are funded through the private sector. We do an annual community arts campaign that raises about $12 million each year from 25 to 35,000 donors. And then we reinvest those funds in more than 150 arts and cultural organizations and projects and artists. Cincinnati is known as the city that sings. We're home to the longest running choral festival in the Western Hemisphere, the May Festival. It was started in the mid-1800s by the region's German settlers. And soon afterwards, the Cincinnati Symphony Orchestra, a top 10 orchestra, was founded to play for the volunteer singers. We have the second oldest opera company, Cincinnati Opera, second only to the Met. The first professional theater for children in Cincinnati Children's Theater, a huge network of community theaters and community art centers. Zaha Hadid's first commission in the US in the Contemporary Arts Center, Tony Award-winning Playhouse, Taft Museum, home of the Tafts, which actually founded ArtsWave in 1927. And we're home to Blink, the nation's largest light-based arts festival that attracts about 2 million people a year to Cincinnati.
Well, thank each of you. I think if nothing else, this webinar will attract more folks to your communities, that's for sure. Daniel shared a little bit about what calculates vibrancy through a particular set of metrics, and that determined how we viewed vibrancy throughout the country. When thinking about your communities, and Alicia, I'm going to pick on you, what do you think adds to that vibrancy? What does this report get right about your community? If you could share that with us.
One of the really unique things about Cincinnati is the way the public comes together to provide funding for the arts every year. And that actually started in 1927 with a challenge by Charles and Anna Taft to the community. They said they would invest $1 million in a permanent arts endowment if the public would match it 2.5 times. And within months in 1927, the match was raised, and probably the first arts endowment was created in the United States, which today does business as ArtsWave. So every year, it's part of the culture that the community comes together. We have workplace giving still in nearly 200 companies and over 1,000 volunteers every year. And we're a region that's highly engaged in the arts too, but that public support really distinguishes our region from other regions where there is more local government or departments of cultural affairs kind of support. So, you know, it's how we grew up in Cincinnati, that the government hasn't taken the lead, and we wish we could figure out more local government support, but we're extremely, extremely proud and grateful to our community for every year realizing the impact of the arts on a more vibrant economy and connected community.
Absolutely. How about you, Megan? What do you think? That same question.
Yeah, I had a few thoughts about this. One thing is the diversity of our arts and culture sector, both in terms of types of art. You know, there was a question in the survey, you know, about being an arts vibrant community, what types of art are you known for? And it was hard for me to decide because it is so diverse, and that's so wonderful. You know, there's all kinds of music, tons of visual art, theater, and then also the demographic diversity of the artists and the creators, different ages, races, ethnicities, rural people, urban people. So that makes it vibrant because there's so much difference and diversity. And along with that, it's the relationships, I think, the connections between artists, between arts organizations, businesses supporting artists, government supporting the arts, you know, everyone coming out as audiences. I think those connections keep things really vibrant.
Absolutely. Marty, I have a little bit of a different question for you. Could you share some of those intangible qualities, those things that are just really hard to measure, contribute to your vibrant community? Again, things that this report couldn't probably capture quantitatively, but something just in the spirit of your community.
Sure. It's a great question. And I think takes me back to something I was saying a moment ago. given our, the impact of the natural surroundings here in Wyoming, near national parks. I think there really is a natural synergy or intersection between the wild, wide open spaces and that sort of creative drive, and something that certainly intangible, but I think there is a connection there between the arts, between nature, between a wild space that we live in, and then also some of the pride that people in this area have around Western art and Western music and visual art. So those are things that sort of pop out to me.
Thank you so much. I want to just kind of shift gears a little bit and just take a moment to talk about funding and the investments that your community is making on the arts. Alicia, I'm going to come back to you. Can you provide a little bit of a context to the history? Well, you've talked a little bit about how you come together as a community to community build fundraising. Can you give us a little bit more about that environment?
Sure. The Arts Wave Community Campaign will actually kick off this year on February 10th. So we're coming right up to it. It's, I think, still the largest community arts campaign in the US, although I think we're neck and neck with Milwaukee right now. We love tracking that. The campaign involves tens of thousands of donors, and we work inside companies, large and small, public companies, private companies, even our city hall and county administration, public school district. And the dollars that we raise then are regranted throughout the community according to a collective impact strategy and using dozens of stakeholder volunteers to assess community impact. The 10 million or so that we are able to reinvest is the largest source of unrestricted dollars for a number of organizations. And the dollars also catalyze really significant new projects, help fuel new organizations. And more recently, we've been funding individual artists as well. So the campaign is what makes a lot of artistic activity and free and accessible art happen in our region.
Megan, would you like to answer that question as well?
Sure, I was just taking a note. Look up Arts Wave. That's really awesome. I guess I would add that while the Community Arts Partnership serves as a statewide community regrant partner with the New York State Council on the Arts, and in that role, our job is to channel those state funds out into every corner of the county. So we're instrumental in moving those funds from the state, directly into every little village. We also in Tompkins County have a hospitality room tax, and part of that money is used to fund kind of our keystone arts partners that help support tourism throughout the county, and we administer that grant program. And then lots of local foundations also support arts, our community foundation and other local foundations, and our area businesses. Anytime you go to see a performance and you see the program book, there's the local businesses. It's a community that really cares, as well as individual donors. So I'm grateful to have that mix, that funding mix for sure.
Thank you so much. How about you, Marty?
Yeah, well, I was looking at the Arts Vibrancy map during the slides and was pleasantly surprised to see Wyoming pretty strongly represented there. I know one of the reasons for that is per capita, we're the least populated state in the country, and the size of our state arts council and some of those state funding resources is relatively strong. But then also in our specific area, there is an incredible number of arts nonprofits in general, and also high concentration of wealth in Teton County, Wyoming. That certainly comes with its challenges, specifically related to artist housing, cost and availability of space for artists to work. But it also does translate into strong philanthropic support for arts organizations and nonprofits such as ours.
Very nice. I want to talk about access, and can you speak to how your local investments have built funding streams that maybe uplift BIPOC or Alana serving organizations? Whomever would like to answer this question, it's for each of you.
Well, I can jump in, and certainly over the last couple of years, thinking of things, how things have evolved since the pandemic. The Wyoming Arts Council, which I just referenced, launched a annual Native American Arts Fellowship, where they're directly supporting Native artists in the area, and a strong sense of identity there. We've been fortunate to partner with them. Last year was the inaugural year of that, and to host the exhibit and artist talk for the Wyoming Native Arts Fellow is a really interesting thing that's come about recently.
Thank you, Marty.
I could jump in and just uplift a really exciting investment in our community that came through Creatives Rebuild New York, which is bringing in over $1 million to Ithaca to the Community Unity Music Education Program. And it's supporting full-time salaries for a group of artists, primarily Black and Afro-Latino artists in Ithaca. And it's supporting their work with the Community Unity Music Education Program to implement and expand a Black arts consciousness curriculum here in Ithaca, but around the country and around the world. That's really great.
That's super cool. I want to know about that, Megan.
We'll talk.
Okay. ArtsWave has a DEIA plan called Lifting as We Learn, and that plan looks at the composition and practices of the arts sector in our region, of arts audiences, and our own internal operations. And we have kind of a unique relationship with our grant recipients. If you receive operating support from ArtsWave, and that's about 40 or so organizations, we ask that you have a board-approved DEI plan with actionable metrics that you're willing to report out on every year. And we're doing that kind of as a collective cohort. We talk about being on the journey together, and ArtsWave provides a lot of shared learning opportunities in this space, and it's helping to make inclusion and equity a hallmark of our region's arts community. We also have a focus on diversifying audiences, knowing that it's super important that we're relevant to our community and keeping up with changes in the community. We're trying to surface those people who are naturally curious about other cultures. So to do that even more intently, we started a series called Flow, which is meant to engage a truly mixed race audience around Black arts professionals and artists. And then at ArtsWave, one of our own KPIs is to increase direct funding for BIPOC-led organizations and artists year over year. And we have 2 dedicated grant programs, one for African-American arts organizations called The Circle, which is partly funded by African-American leadership donors to our campaign. And then we have a Black and Brown artist grant program, which commissions work every year from 20 to 30 BIPOC artists in the region. So that's helping. Those 2 really direct programs are helping us increase investment in addition to what we're already funding through other grants programs.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I want to pinpoint that the chat, our folks in the background are dropping some helpful chats, some links to helpful resources that are being mentioned today. And I also see that there are a couple of questions that we've received, and I just want to pause Marty, I think you've helped with answering some of those questions in the chat, but I just wanted to say aloud, there was a question for you that mentioned that there's a challenge for artist housing. Is that something that's being addressed in your city or county, or there are other organizations? And if yes, could you share what's being done about it?
Yeah, I appreciate the question, and I know as a mountain resort community, it's something that other resort communities often grapple with, and other communities more broadly even. So what I just responded with is the town and county are do have some initiatives. They have a affordable housing department, and none of those efforts are artist specific. It's mostly local workforce and particularly hospital employees, fire, EMS, that type of stuff. And so just some very preliminary steps. Even as I was thinking about today's webinar, one of the silver linings of the pandemic has been an opportunity for our organizations to collaborate more deeply, and whether that was in response to loss of programming revenue and working collectively with our resident organizations on rent relief efforts. And so we're trying to carry some of that same mentality into addressing these larger issues that also affect us all, and one of those being artist housing. So no real concrete steps yet, but it's certainly something that we realize it will take all of our powers combined to address in any meaningful way.
Thank you so much, Marty, and thank you for each of you for being flexible to allow us to kind of hear from the folks in the audience and get their perspectives. I've heard each of you kind of pinpoint the pandemic and some of the learning and thinking that you've taken into your current spaces. For each of you, and Marty, since I'm already picking on you, just could you help us reflect for the past few years, and how has your community responded to the pandemic? You just talked about housing. Are there other ways that you've as a community responded to the pandemic and what it's taught you?
Sure. Well, to me, really the root of it has been collaboration and supporting one another. Our model is an interesting one where we have such a wide range of organizations represented on our campus, over 20 organizations, and there's sort of natural collaboration and cooperation that happens within that. But you would also understand there's a certain amount of competition, whether that's for fundraising, confusion about programming. And I think the pandemic was a great opportunity for us to set some of that aside or rise above that and really focus on the common good. And we were very successful, really going to our community, to our philanthropic supporters, and saying, if the arts and culture are important to you, something you want to see on the other side of the pandemic, then we collectively need your help. And that is something now we're really moving forward in a number of ways, and to me is really positive and exciting.
How about you, Megan? What has been your experience?
Yeah, similar to Marty, I definitely saw a lot of collaboration happening here in Ithaca as well. But one thing I wanted to mention is, right when the pandemic hit, pretty early on, the Community Arts Partnership launched an emergency artist relief fund, which maybe many of you did as well, but raising money to just give straight out to artists for financial support. And that was really well received and very important. The next year we asked artists, is this still useful? Is this still what you want? And the feedback we got was, we actually want funding, to put us to work in service of the recovery of the community. And so we tweaked it to become the Creative Recovery Fund, which was supporting artists and arts groups to address racial justice, climate change, and public and mental health. And we've been able to fund some really exciting projects and really put the arts to work on behalf of the whole community.
That's exciting. That's really valuable work. Alicia, how about you? That same question.
I think I look back at two sort of different things. One, in the realm of funding, I mentioned at the beginning that Cincinnati doesn't have consistent local government art support, but during COVID, both the city of Cincinnati and Hamilton County, the largest county, stepped up with funding through the CARES Act and the ARP, and channeled those dollars through ArtsWave for the first time. So we were able to administer about $14 million over the last couple of years. And, you know, I think it's the sector's collective advocacy that made that possible, as well as the fact that we were kind of positioned and ready to take that on in a transparent and equitable way. So I'm hopeful, point is, I'm hopeful that going forward, we will have more collaboration with our city and county, and build on some small experiments with radical intent that we've partnered on with the city. And then the other thing, echoing Megan and Marty, collaboration in Cincinnati's case, it was also increased communication among our arts organizations. And, you know, that very first Friday after the Thursday when everything shut down, you know, there were about 16 of large organization CEOs who got on a phone call with me and, you know, like, what the heck, what do we do? And that phone call then led to, you know, another one the following Friday. And we are still talking as a group now every other Friday. And that communication helped them stay sane and figure out how to navigate, you know, rules and protocols, and create some new artistic collaborations. And then within the ArtsWave team, our chief operating officer and our chief investment officer have been convening mid-sized organizations and smaller organizations on a really regular basis. And our CFO convenes finance directors, and our marketing VP convenes marketing people. So we just keep people talking, and we've been told that has been really, really helpful.
I feel very optimistic listening to each of you talk about your communities, and we're at that last question, just looking at time. I just want us to look ahead and share what excites you about the future within your communities, specifically within your art and culture spaces. What is the thing that you're looking forward to in this next upcoming year? Alicia, can you kick us off?
Sure. Well, we're still figuring out how to welcome audiences back. I think, you know, we're all cautiously optimistic, but we're also aware that the next couple of years are going to be equally hard in the arts as the federal money kind of dries up and people figure out what they want to do in terms of consuming arts and entertainment. But yeah, over the next few years, ArtsWave is counting down to our centennial anniversary. And each year in this 5-year countdown, we're doing some special initiatives that spotlight different ways the arts have incredible benefit in the community. This year, we have a spotlight on arts education and 50,000 field trips that we're raising special dollars for. You know, we got to get the next generation comfortable coming into our arts venues, knowing what to expect, making that habit of arts participation. We're also looking at new technologies to engage youth in the arts, gamifying arts experiences, if you will. And, you know, I mentioned that challenge in 1927 to the community. In our office here, we have every single signed pledge card from those donors in 1927, like handwritten signatures. And we're asking ourselves, how do we re-inspire the community to come together for the next 100 years? And what does Cincinnati's arts landscape look like for the future? And knowing that we're looking at those pledge cards now, if only you would invest today, you know, 100 years from now, people are going to be gratefully remembering the investment in community that the arts represent. So I'm super excited about what 100 years of community support for the arts looks like and feels like, and how that can inspire others.
It sounds like amazing legacy building.
Really?
Megan, how about you?
Well, similar to Alicia, I'm excited, but also concerned about kind of where we're at in the pandemic, especially with performing arts organizations, just not having the audiences back and the federal funding drying up. We're collaborating, we're talking, we're advocating, we're working together. So I'm curious what's going to happen. I hope that things go well, but it is a bit of a dire time. But I'm also excited to see what happens there. I'm excited about some efforts that are happening with integrating the arts into other areas of the community. We have a Reimagining Public Safety initiative here in Tompkins County, and the leadership of that has been really interested in how arts can help support that vision, public art in particular, and also our food justice and food equity plans here in Tompkins County. And I'm working on some food sculptures about food and food culture. So that's exciting to me. And then my organization just celebrated 30 years, and we are doing a strategic planning process. And I just today heard the feedback from the focus groups, and I'm very excited about where we're going to go from here.
And that's exciting. That's really great work. And I'm excited to learn more about the food sculptures that are coming from your
Yeah.
journey. That's really cool work. How about you, Marty?
Yeah, I think I'll echo much of what Alicia and Megan have said. Certainly challenges ahead of us, and all of us working in the arts are well aware of that. But I certainly have seen, the pandemic gave us an opportunity to really articulate our value as a place, as the means for people to come together, celebrate culture. And for me, if nothing else, it just really reinforced how important that is for us. And then, as Alicia was starting to say, with education, with technological advancements, I don't think I'd be alone in saying that virtual programming will never replace in-person programming, but I think we've learned a lot about it. There's great benefit that it brings and ways that we can utilize it in new and exciting ways. So those are the things that, keep me hopeful and inspired.
Thank you to each of you. I can't stress enough that it's been so powerful to hear from diverse communities from across the nation talk about the work that you're doing within your spaces to uplift the arts. And on behalf of SMU DataArts, I want to just express our sincere thanks and appreciation to you for sharing your expertise, your vulnerability and transparency within this space. I appreciate the questions and the comments that we've received in the chat. As we shift out of our webinar space, I again just want to continue to recommend that you stay connected to that report. We will continue to uplift organizations and work throughout the nation. So we hope that you stay connected with us to learn more about the blogs from other spaces and other communities as they talk about their work within their communities. But I just want to check back into Daniel. Were there any last minute questions or statements that you wanted to share before we officially close out our webinar space?
Yeah, I'll just mention one quick thing. There was a question that was submitted asking about the numbers when you look at the map or look at the report, and those are percentile scores. So if you see something with a 90, that's the 90th percentile, meaning that community scored higher on that metric than 90% of all other communities, whether CBSAs or counties. So that's all.
Well, I'll just jump in and say thank you to Daniel and to Monica for all this information, and to SMU DataArts for compiling the list and giving the sector a way to understand community by community, because it's enormously helpful for advocacy, either where we want to go or where we're already shining. And just thanks for what you do.
And with that, I feel like that's the best way to end our webinar time. Well, we'll continue to share our recording of today's webinar. If there are any additional questions that you have for myself or anyone else on the SMU DataArts team, we'll provide ways for you to communicate with us. But with that, thank you for sharing an hour of your time. We look forward to staying connected with you, and we wish you a wonderful rest of your day. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.